Valve recently made a big change to how Steam reviews work. Let's see it in action. I'm going to click on the store search button right here, and I'm going to open up Silk Song, which is a brand new game and currently sitting at very positive, which is no surprise. Everybody that I talk to really, really likes this game. But if I look to the left of it, here it says English reviews. So this means that the English reviews for the game are very positive. Well, what about other reviews for the game? If I click on the very positive, and then I come up here, it says English reviews, very positive, 64,805 reviews. But if I come over here to see language breakdown and click on that, well, now it's going to show me something different. So my language, very positive, as we already saw. Other languages that have scores, we have a lot of blue, meaning that those are good reviews. So if I look at this one, 97% of Spanish-speaking reviews are saying that it is positive. In fact, it's overwhelmingly positive. But if you look over here at simplified Chinese, that is mixed. 51% of the 50,331 user reviews in this language are positive. So it's not doing too well with simplified Chinese language speakers. And the reason why is apparently because of poor translations. This is a perfect example of a recent change that Valve made. I feel like this is a hill that Valve shouldn't be dying on. In fact, I feel like this is a hill that Valve shouldn't even be fighting on, because when you look at all of the different places where end users can review video games, of all of them, Steam, to me, seems like the place that is least affected by the thing that Valve seems to be trying to combat against. And if you read the couple of paragraphs that Valve put on their blog post about this, and you read between the lines, it seems like they're trying to combat review bombing. But if you look at all of the different places where an end user can review a game, Steam is probably the one that is the least susceptible to that, because in order to review a game on Steam, you have to have it in your library. You have to have bought it. And not only that, but it shows the end users, it shows the people who are reading the reviews exactly how long you played the game for when you read it. It makes it really hard to review bomb a game unless it's a game that you own. And I think that that is one of the reasons why I take Steam review scores with way more consideration than I would on pretty much any other platform, because you have to actually have played the game in order to review it. So let's say that I'm primarily English speaking and you're primarily French speaking. With Valve's new system, basically, we will now see different reviews. Now, when I scroll down, like I'm on a store page and I scroll down in Steam and I start looking at the reviews that people left, well, yeah, I'm going to want to see the ones that are in English, because as somebody who does not speak French, I don't want to see the French ones unless there's an auto translate button just built into Steam, which is something that they could easily implement. I mean, heck, you can do that pretty much anywhere these days. That said, that feature doesn't exist, so I don't want to see the French one. So it makes sense to separate those types of reviews, the written reviews, by that. But that's not the only thing that Valve is changing. They're also changing the review score, the thing that we usually look at, mostly positive, mostly negative, overwhelmingly positive. Those review scores, until recently, were worldwide. So if you reviewed something in France and I reviewed the same game in the United States, both of our reviews, those would go to the same score. With Valve's new system, now those scores are going to be separated based on what region you're in or what language you have selected. And I feel like that this could be a mistake, but I don't think it's done with ill intentions. And I understand that, because people that live where I live and speak the language that I speak probably share experiences that have happened to me as well. We share the same culture and the same language. And because of that, maybe they would have a better insight into the types of games that I might enjoy. So when their review comes up, well, I can look at that and say, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. At the same time, I also will be completely honest, most of the time, unless the reviews are overwhelmingly negative or something like that, most of the time I don't scroll down and read the reviews. I just see a general consensus of what people like overall. And if it's really negative, I usually scroll through and find out why it's really negative, because a lot of times it has to do with poor optimization, which, while that sucks, I have a really beefy computer and can usually run games that are poorly optimized anyway, and so I wouldn't necessarily take that into account when making a buying decision. When you start separating out people's reviews who don't share the same culture with you, or don't speak the same language, or do not have those same experiences or zeitgeist, when you start taking those reviews out, well, you're kind of blocking information from me that I think could be really, really useful when deciding if a game is great, or whether deciding if there's a problem with a game that needs to be addressed. We would see different scores, and I understand that Valve is looking in that and saying, well, the people who are like you are the ones that you want to listen to when it comes to your game recommendations. But I don't think it's that simple, and I don't really believe that that's the reason that they're doing it. Well, according to Valve, it's because it gives the end user who's looking at the reviews a better indication of the overall user sentiment when it comes to what is this game like. People in different regions, they might give a poor review because there's bad translations. That's not something that anybody, like, let's say the game is primarily an English-speaking game, but there's translations. Well, in France or in Japan, where the translation goes from English to France or English to Japanese, maybe that's bad translations. And people who are playing in those languages, well, they're going to review it based on that, based on those problems. And as somebody who's English speaking, I would never run into those problems. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of logic behind what Valve is changing there. Another example is networking stuff. This is another thing that Valve brought up. Let's say that your servers are in, we'll say Spain for some reason, and you are located in Australia. Well, you're going to have kind of a crappy ping to their servers. And so when you go to play the game, you're going to have lots of latency if it's like an online game, and that latency is going to degrade your experience with that game. And so then when you leave a review, you might say something like, this game is super laggy and doesn't work the way that it should, whereas somebody who lives closer to where the servers actually are wouldn't have that experience. And so again, the logic stands up, and it makes sense why Valve would make this change. So essentially, Valve is now separating out the overall score of a game based on what region you are in, what language you are speaking, because it might make sense when it comes to bad translations or network errors or cultural stuff, which brings me to the real reason that I think they're doing this, which is review bombing. I think that this could go a small step towards making review bombing less effective than it is now, which could be considered a good thing or a bad thing depending on who you are. I personally am not a fan of review bombing, with few exceptions. Too often games get review bombed by people that have never played the game. Again, not a problem on Valve or on Steam, because you can only review games that you've paid for or ones that are in your library. So as long as it's not a free-to-play game, most review bombers are not going to spend money on a game that they, wish didn't exist so that they can review bomb it. That just doesn't make any sense for them. But like I said before, there are exceptions to review bombing, and when I actually think it does some good. And I can't think of a more perfect example than Helldivers 2. It was getting ready to launch, and Sony wanted to require a PSN login, but there were so many people picking up the game. Like, that game sold like crazy at first. There were so many people picking up the game on Steam that they couldn't make PSN accounts fast enough, essentially. And so Arrowhead Studios went to Sony and said, hey, can we not do this right now? And we'll just let people play the game. And I don't feel like either Sony or Arrowhead Studios communicated the fact that you would eventually need a PSN login in order to play the game. I don't think they communicated that effectively enough. And because of that, a lot of people bought the game that live in locations where you could not play the game because PSN does not exist in those regions. And because of that, once Sony decided, okay, we've got everything's calmed down now, let's activate the PSN requirement, a lot of people were pissed off, and rightly so, because suddenly they couldn't play a game that they paid for because they cannot make an account because they don't live in a country where PSN exists. And it was a lot of countries. It was not a small number of people. So people banded together and they said, Sony, this is not cool. And they review bombed them. And then once Sony backtracked on their ridiculous ask, which, by the way, hold on, I got to make sure I make this clear. I don't think it's ridiculous for Sony to require PSN. I think it's ridiculous for Sony to require PSN after the fact and in countries where it does not exist. And they knew where it wouldn't exist, and they shouldn't have shipped the game to those locations. They should not have sold the game to people who live in those regions. It shouldn't even show up on the store if they were going to be like that. So once it was eventually fixed, the Helldivers community said, okay, we have to now reverse review bomb and fix the review score so it would be back to a positive review score. And they did that. And it was like this ridiculous graphic that I'm going to try and remember to put on screen right now. You can see the negative reviews, and then you can see the positive reviews after it changed. And that's the kind of thing where I think this policy change is going to make it less effective, because if the people who are living in those regions are review bombing the game because of a situation like that, well, everybody outside of those regions, we're not going to see those bad reviews. And I think that would make Sony or any company less likely to respond to those people, especially since they already got their money. Overall, I think that is a bad thing, even if it also prevents other review bombing that I think is just kind of lame review bombing. A bunch of rage bait YouTubers who are mad about some ridiculous thing, and they are trying to divide the community by finding something divisive and then trying to exploit that so that they can get clicks and make money. And I say this as somebody who puts stuff on YouTube, but I try not to be one of those guys. I try not to be a rage baity guy, because that's not fun to me, which is most of the time why when I think something sucks, I usually don't talk about it. I usually just talk about the things that I'm excited about. And that's why I also want to say that there's good news to this. The good news, you can turn this off. It's turned on by default, and I wish that they didn't turn it on by default. But when you go into the Steam store, you can change it so that it shows you the old way, so you can see everything, which is great. So if you want to get back to the way that it used to be and actually be able to see the real score for games, I've got a link to this website down below that like button. While you're down there, make sure you click the like button because it helps out a ton. But I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and it says, if you want to ignore this new setting, you can change it here in your store preferences. So I'm going to click on this link, and you have to be logged in to Steam. But if you look right up here, it says review score settings, and then there's an edit preferences button. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that edit preference button. And it says here, Steam review score calculation, exclude reviews that are off topic and from other languages. That's on by default. I'm going to switch over to include, and it automatically kicks me back out. And now you can see my current setting is to include every Steam review in the review scores. So now that I've done that, if I go to the Steam website and I search for Silk Song and I click on that, you can see that now it's mostly positive. But if I want to see all the other information, I can still see all of that information by coming up here and clicking on see the language breakdown. So it shows me what everybody thinks of the game right away, but if I want more information, I can go diving for it. But it adds like this layer of confusion, because now what is the right score to look at? Is the right score the one that's like in North America, or is the right one to be the one that's over in Europe? Who knows? There's no good way for us to determine what is the overall score of this unless you turn off this new feature. But at the end of the day, I think personally that it's a bad idea, and I'm very curious what you all think. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, and thanks for watching.